self-time for questions. But continuing in the elephant talk, Tammy is going to talk about elephant bull behavior in Pilanesberg and some of the stuff that she's seen there. Thanks, Tammy.
Thanks, Anna. So this was some of the work that formed part of my master's quite a while ago, but I was looking at the question of, can facilitating natural social structures correct for unnatural and unwanted behaviours in bulls in an elephant population? And it was a case study in Pilanesberg National Park 20 years after the introduction of an initial incomplete population. There's probably a story a number of you have come across. So essentially it's the importance of social structure in elephant bull management and understanding. So it's using an illustration from Pilanesberg where mimicking a more natural system corrected for behavioral problems triggered by ill-informed management decisions at the time. Now the first step in understanding an elephant's behavior comes from understanding their learning processes and potential. Increasingly more evidence points to the importance of social connections where finding their place in their society leads to a lot more stability in their behavior. And I believe understanding and using natural cues and triggers can help troubleshoot and mitigate a fair amount of management problems. So first, it's important to understand that a lot of an elephant's learning and developing occurs throughout their lives in response to environmental and social circumstances. And one interesting way of appreciating this relative to other animals is looking at the percentage of brain weight of an animal at birth compared to when they are fully grown. The lower this percentage, the more it indicates an animal has need and capacity to develop and grow throughout their lifetimes. So if we look at this on a scale, humans are at the one extreme, as we are born with 28% of our brain weight at birth, while most mammals, on the other hand, are born with 90% of their brain weight. In between these, we have chimps at 54%, bottlenose dolphins at 42%, and elephants at 30 to 50%, depending on the source, indicating a prolonged developmental period for the brain, where the environment will significantly shape neuronal microstructure. And this is why we tend to see more personality and ability to adapt in species born with lower brain weight, because they are more shaped by their environment as they mature. So we can appreciate how negative events in an elephant's past can affect their future behavior, as seen with instances of PTSD-type behaviors, but also how they have the ability to move past negative histories if the right environment is facilitated and they're able to learn to adapt. Then another important consideration is appreciating how adolescence is an important learning period for bulls, with mature bulls bringing stability to these bull societies through their knowledge and experience, which younger bulls can gain from. And it is through these interactions between age classes and within age classes that elephant bulls slowly, over years, establish their position in social hierarchies. To further understand social status, in order to conserve energy and prevent from unnecessary and often lethal injury, bull hierarchies are often established using visual and social cues above all else. Fighting to establish dominance is the least common way to assign social status amongst bulls, as it is the most risky to them. And most often, simply size is used as a visual cue. Then the ultimate indicator of dominance is a bull in must. Being in must can be physiologically taxing on an elephant bull, as their testosterone levels increase, as their focus shifts to increasing mating opportunities. They travel a lot more for this purpose, which results in less time for feeding. The larger and more fit a bull is, the longer they can be in must for, using their fitness to their advantage over other bulls during these times to be in and to maintain must. So what happens if this setting is compromised? Pilanesberg first introduced elephants into the reserve between 1981 and 1993. And all of these elephants, except for two 19-year-old ex-circus elephants, were juveniles of approximately 8 years in age. This was at a time when reserves that wanted elephants got juveniles captured during the culling operations in Kruger, and only juveniles could be moved due to height constraints on the available trucks at the time, which meant only elephants under the age of about 10 could be transported with the setup. So once released onto Pilanesberg, these juvenile elephants grouped together, forming somewhat pseudo-herds, but as you can imagine, they would have totally lacked any semblance of a normal herd structure. So the consequence of having elephants in a population with an incomplete social structure became alarmingly apparent when several years down the line after this introduction, between the years of 1992 and 1997, early must and hypergression was seen in these now young adult bulls who had grown up in the system. As older bulls were absent, these younger bulls were coming into premature must, in this case almost 10 years earlier than it would be expected in the wild. They experienced must at the early age of 18 years old and for unnaturally prolonged periods of time for up to 3 to 5 months. As a consequence, orphans behaved with extreme aggression directed towards vehicles on the reserve as well as white rhinos and ended up killing more than 40, sadly. And then other game reserves who had conducted similar introductions of orphans in the previous years were experiencing the same thing, so the problem could definitely be narrowed down to the incomplete social structures that had led to these unusual occurrences. Basically, they were experiencing a physiological state they were not yet primed to handle, which resulted in this frustrated kind of misplaced aggression. And then in the wake of this state, they were not comprehending very well. They were also have been lacking the comfort of a complete herd. So without stability, coping mechanisms, or any examples to follow, they were finding inappropriate things to challenge. So a normal complete bull hierarchy within a population is made up of multiple levels of different life and experience stages, and they're relative to age and size. So in a complete population, the most senior position would therefore be held by bulls who are at least at full body size and are above 35 years old, with younger, smaller bulls falling in successively under this. In Pilanesberg, as all the bulls were introduced as juveniles, it was first going to require a full generation before these high levels of the hierarchy could be occupied. So in the meantime, as these bulls would have approached the age of leaving their herds as adolescents, there would not have been a hierarchy for them to enter into in this transitional stage into adulthood. So without these placeholders above them, these younger bulls would have invariably shifted up in the hierarchy prematurely without the age, experience, or life skills to be the dominant prime breeders that should occur here. With this understanding, eventually, the reserve decided to introduce older bulls from Kruger to see if this could bring some structure. Incredibly, it was successful, and as hoped, these younger bulls stopped coming into must, and the aggressive outbursts directed at calves and rhinos stopped. And what this highlighted was that even a not fully complete hierarchy with less older males present than expected from a natural population can be effective in regulating or reducing must, and therefore aggressive behavior in younger bulls. So this key presence acted as an instinctual cue within the population. Then once the rhino death stopped and the problem appeared to be solved, not a lot of follow-up was done on these bulls, and then that's where I came in. And to evaluate this, I spent 2 years monitoring them from 2015 to see if any of this aggression was still persisting in any way, and what the bull hierarchy was doing now that more time had passed. I mean, given the circumstances and the trauma of their histories, it almost wouldn't be surprising to have follow-on behavioral problems. But if there's enough in place that supports elephant well-being, resilience in the sensitive species is supported, and then these various stresses seem to be nullified. So based on historical assumptions that bull movement and behavior around herds is mostly reproductively driven, and based on the assumption that bull presence with other bulls is predominantly driven by competition around these interactions, the following hypotheses were investigated. I hypothesized that more than half of the bull sightings would be without herds present. I expected bulls over the age of 25 years to be in must more than half the time when they were observed with herds, and then moreover I expected that there would not be any other must bulls in the herds in the presence of an older bull in must, and I expected the prevalence of older bulls with herds to be higher than younger bulls with herds. This first entailed that all the herds and bulls were individually identified, and then the presence and group status of each observed animal was recorded over a year period. There were certainly some unusual findings which either points at a consequence of a disrupted history and a system still moving towards balance, or just highlighting that further social intricacies exist in the species in smaller reserves, which have just not been extensively researched enough to appreciate. So of all the sightings, this graph shows the percentage of time each age group of male elephants devoted to being alone, with other bulls, or with herds. And what we see is from the adult stage, there are less regular sightings with herds, but that they are more regularly being seen with other bulls. So a lot of literature leads one to expect that bulls are mostly solitary, except for when visiting herds for mating opportunities. But we are seeing that at each age stage, bulls are alone for the smallest fraction of their time and are more often than not either with other herds or other bulls. Then when bulls were seen with herds, this graph shows the proportion of the time where they were in must versus in a non-must state. And again, this points at how our social interactions between bulls and herds are not only reproductively driven. And it's worth noting that in the youngest age group here, must was only seen once. So ultimately, the findings of this follow-up study indicated likely consequences of an incomplete bull social structure, which has compromised the bull hierarchy, as there were very few bulls in the oldest age class. But as there is no more interspecies aggression occurring, it appears intactness, as well as proportions of age group represented in bull hierarchies, are both contributing factors in correcting behavioral abnormalities. Then when looking a lot more closely at the social interactions that were occurring, far from being driven purely by reproductive need, it was clear that elephants had favored conspecifics to spend time with in the long term. So using data of which individuals were seen together and at what frequency, one can represent the occurrence and strength of relationships in a population using a sociogram, as shown here. So the results then indicate if sightings point at intentional groupings or whether they are based on chance interaction. So here, this is an example of what's a representation of the associations between the herds and the subadult bull age class, where the closeness of the points, the thickness of the lines, and the number of connections to other points would all indicate strength of relationships. Here I've just circled the bulls in blue, and you can just see how each one is uniquely positioned. The more on the periphery they are, the less connected they are to the rest of the population. But you can see some are a lot more connected and some are a lot more solitary. And then this is just between the herds and the 20 to 30-year-old bulls. And this is the herds and the 30 to 40-year-old bulls. Also, again, you can see some bulls are more connected to the herds, some bulls aren't even connected to each other. So very, very unique. It's not uniform across the population. And then lastly, this shows the relationship between the herds and the 4 oldest Kruger bulls in the bottom right there. And the point of these sociograms is to illustrate just how socially integrated bulls are in a population, but also how each bull is uniquely connected, with some being more solitary by nature and more being quite socially connected. So in an ideal world, this kind of thing would and should be considered during any form of intervention with these populations. So for example, choosing which elephants to collar for various social studies, depending on what your research questions are. Do you want a socially connected one? Or you're looking at a solitary one? You're going to get very different results potentially. And then also if you're wanting to translocate or move elephants, the more socially connected ones are going to be a bit more disruptive to your population versus identifying more solitary individuals who aren't as connected. So with an appreciation for the importance of sociality in elephants, the rule of thumb seems to be that if you want minimal conflict and minimal unwarranted aggression, one needs to have a more balanced population, which translates into a more resilient population that can better deal with trauma or changes. If one gets this right, it lends itself to management that is less intensive and where less constant interventions are needed. So when managing elephants, we need to look at the whole extent of what determines behavior. Nature, nurture, environment, and biology are all things to weigh up for any individual and in any population. For example, if one notices a problem behavior-wise, start by thinking through what may have happened to affect them socially. We need to challenge the problem bull mentality, for example, as changing behavior can often be traced back to quite logical causes, which explain the effects being seen. Elephants fill voids by biologically responding to gaps in the system, but all we may see is some expression of unusual behavior that we just don't understand yet. So it's important to understand what natural process might have been compromised that can be reversed, or what natural process can be strategically stimulated to mitigate or preempt or prevent problems. What we are seeing more and more is that natural mechanisms are the most effective and persistent in the long run. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Tammy. Yeah, you made up good time. So we've got questions for one question if there are. Declan, front here.
Tammy, thanks. Did I interpret that correctly, that Bull 14 never socialized with a cow during your study?
Yeah, so in that case, I would never have, so it's possible it happened, but in all of my sightings when I encountered them, that bull was not with herds, yeah.
Do you recall, that was a Kruger bull, eh?
No, okay, no,
Not,
if it was
okay.
one of the, I think there was another younger bull that
Okay.
I did see that, but the links are just a bit weaker.
Okay,
So
no, I didn't understand that. Thanks.